My name is Melanie Taylor, 34 years old, and until last week, I was the most valuable person at Bradford Pharmaceuticals that nobody knew about. For 8 years, my innovations quietly powered the company to billions in revenue. Then Harold Bradford retired, his son Jeffrey took over, and suddenly my brain was worth less than my appearance. When his son Maxwell called me just a pretty face, I made a decision that would shake their corporate foundation to its core. Before I tell you how I brought a billion-dollar company to its knees overnight, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button if you have ever been underestimated. I graduated from MIT with a double major in biochemistry and biomedical engineering. My thesis on targeted drug delivery systems caught the attention of several pharmaceutical giants, but Harold Bradford was different. While other companies saw dollar signs, Harold saw potential. He offered me not just a job, but a partnership of minds. "Melanie," he said during our first meeting, "I do not want to just employ you. I want to nurture your genius." That conversation changed my life. At 26, I joined Bradford Pharmaceuticals as a junior researcher. By 28, I was heading my own lab. By 30, I had developed 3 groundbreaking drug delivery systems that revolutionized how medications for chronic conditions could be administered. My biomatrix capsule technology allowed for timed release that reduced a 12-pill daily regimen to a single morning dose. Patients with complex conditions suddenly had their lives back. Harold was always fair. Unlike many companies that claim all intellectual property from their employees, he structured my contract differently. "Great minds need ownership of their creations," he insisted. His lawyers nearly had heart attacks, but he was adamant. I retained primary ownership of my patents with Bradford Pharmaceuticals, securing exclusive licensing rights as long as certain conditions were met. It was unprecedented, but Harold said innovation needed proper incentives. Over 8 years, my patent portfolio grew to 16 major innovations and 37 secondary improvements. These patents were not minor tweaks to existing technologies. They were fundamental breakthroughs that competitors could only dream about. Bradford Pharmaceuticals built entire product lines around my work, with annual revenues exceeding $3 billion directly from my innovations alone. Despite my contributions, I remained largely unknown outside the company. I preferred working in my lab to attending corporate functions. My team knew my value, though. Stephanie Jenkins had been my laboratory assistant for 6 years. She was brilliant herself, with a quick mind and attention to detail that complemented my sometimes scattered thought process. Daniel Moore from Regulatory Affairs worked closely with us, navigating the complex FDA approval processes for our innovations. Lisa Franklin in HR had become a friend, one of the few people who saw both my professional value and treated me as a person, not just a corporate asset. My life found balance in this environment. Weekdays were filled with research development and the occasional corporate meeting. Weekends involved hiking in nearby state parks, reading voraciously, and occasional dinner with the small circle of friends I had maintained since college. I was not flashy with my considerable salary. My modest 3-bedroom house was chosen for its proximity to work, and the large basement I had converted into a home laboratory for weekend inspirations. Everything changed when Harold announced his retirement. At 72, he deserved his rest, but rumors about his son Jeffrey sent waves of concern throughout the company. Jeffrey Bradford had worked at 3 major corporations each stint, ending with controversial departures and allegations of toxic leadership. Harold rarely spoke of his son, which everyone understood to be its own statement. "Change is coming," Lisa warned me over lunch in the company cafeteria 2 weeks before Harold's departure. "Jeffrey has already requested comprehensive personnel files for all department heads." "Should I be concerned?" I asked, pushing my salad around more than eating it. "Let me put it this way," Lisa lowered her voice. "I would review your contract carefully. Refresh your understanding of your rights." That conversation prompted me to call Martin Goldstein, the lawyer who had helped me understand my original contract. We spent 3 hours going through every clause, every condition, every right I maintained over my intellectual property. Martin seemed pleased with what he saw. "Harold protected you well," he noted. "As long as you follow proper protocols, your innovations remain yours, with Bradford having licensing exclusivity only under specific conditions." The office atmosphere grew tense as Harold's last day approached. Long-term employees updated their resumes. Whispered conversations stopped when certain executives walked by. I remained optimistic, perhaps naively so. Surely Jeffrey would recognize the value of the research division that powered his family's company. Harold's final week was emotional for many of us. He made a point of visiting each department, thanking people personally for their contributions. When he reached my lab, he spent over an hour reminiscing about each breakthrough we had celebrated together. "You have been like the daughter I never had," he said as he prepared to leave. "I want you to know that regardless of what happens next." I should have paid more attention to the concern in his eyes. Harold's farewell party was extravagant but genuine. Hundreds of employees gathered in the main atrium, which had been transformed with elegant decorations and catering that would impress even the most jaded corporate executive. People from every department came to wish him well, many with tearful embraces and stories of how his leadership had impacted their lives. When Harold gave his farewell speech, you could hear a pin drop. "Success in business is not measured by profits alone," he said, his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. "It is measured by the lives we improve. The patients who benefit from our medications, the employees who grow under our guidance, the communities we support. Never forget that we are in the business of helping people." After the public celebration, Harold invited a small group of us to his office for a private farewell. When the others had left, he asked me to stay for a moment. "Melanie, I want to speak candidly," he said, his usual confident demeanor slightly dimmed. "Jeffrey is ambitious. He sees business differently than I do. I have tried to prepare him to instill my values, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Just remember what we discussed when you first joined us. Your mind is your greatest asset. Guard it well." I nodded, touched by his concern, but still not fully grasping the warning. "I am sure it will be fine, Harold. Your son must understand what makes Bradford successful." Harold's smile did not reach his eyes. "I hope you are right. Promise me you will call if you need anything. Retirement does not mean I have disappeared." Jeffrey Bradford arrived the following Monday with an entourage of new executives. The contrast with his father was immediately apparent. Where Harold had been warm and approachable, Jeffrey was cold and formal. Where Harold wore comfortable business casual attire, Jeffrey arrived in bespoke suits that probably cost more than most employees' monthly salaries. Where Harold knew dozens of employees by name, Jeffrey referred to people by their titles or departments. The company-wide meeting that afternoon set the tone for the new regime. The auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as Jeffrey took the stage, flanked by his new executive team. Most notable was Victor Daniels, introduced as the new Chief Operating Officer. His sharp features and calculating gaze made me instantly uncomfortable. "Bradford Pharmaceuticals has been successful." Jeffrey began pacing the stage with practiced precision. "But success in the past does not guarantee success in the future. We are facing increased competition, changing regulations, and market disruptions. To thrive, we must modernize our approach, streamline operations, trim dead weight, optimize human resources." The corporate buzzwords continued for 20 minutes. Employees exchanged nervous glances as Jeffrey outlined his vision for the company, heavy on profit margins and market share, light on patient outcomes or employee development. Not once did he mention the research that powered their product pipeline. The first week under Jeffrey's leadership brought a flurry of changes. New reporting structures, new approval processes, new performance metrics. Each change seemed designed to centralize control under Jeffrey and his inner circle. My first direct interaction with the new leadership came during a department head meeting. I prepared a comprehensive presentation on our current research projects, their development timelines, and projected market impacts. 5 minutes into my presentation, Jeffrey interrupted. "Let us focus on the projects nearest to monetization," he said, barely looking up from his tablet. "The theoretical research can be summarized in an email. But several of these projects are revolutionary approaches that could transform entire treatment categories," I explained, trying to redirect to the slides showing market projections. "Mark can give us the market analysis," Jeffrey said, nodding to a new executive I had never met before. "He has extensive experience in pharmaceutical market dynamics." I watched in stunned silence as Mark, who had never seen our research until that morning, proceeded to make sweeping statements about which projects should be prioritized based solely on short-term profit potential. Several times I tried to provide context or corrections, but Jeffrey consistently directed questions to others. The pattern continued in subsequent meetings. My expertise was repeatedly sidelined. Male colleagues were asked to validate my statements. Projects were reassigned without consulting me. Several respected researchers from my team were transferred to other departments or had their positions eliminated entirely. This is just phase 1 restructuring, Lisa confided after a particularly brutal week where 12 long-term employees were let go. There is talk of more significant reorganization coming. I tried to focus on my work to believe that results would speak for themselves, but as days turned to weeks, my concerns grew. My badge access to certain laboratories was restricted. My budget requests faced new scrutiny. Database permissions I had always held were suddenly under review. Then came the meeting that should have opened my eyes completely. Jeffrey called me to his office to discuss the upcoming investor presentation. I arrived prepared to talk about our research pipeline and innovation strategy. Melanie, Jeffrey said without preamble, we are adjusting how we present our research division to investors. I have prepared slides highlighting our most promising developments, I said, opening my laptop. That will not be necessary, he replied. Victor will handle the technical presentation. We would like you to attend to answer any specific questions that might arise. I frowned. But I lead these projects. I can best explain the technology and its implications. Jeffrey's smile did not reach his eyes. Victor has been briefed. Investors respond better to consistent messaging from the executive team. The implication was clear. Despite my role and expertise, I was not considered part of the leadership worth showcasing. I left that meeting with a growing sense of dread. Something fundamental was changing at Bradford Pharmaceuticals, and for the first time, I began to wonder if there was still a place for me in the company Harold had built. The following weeks brought a steady escalation of concerning incidents. Jeffrey brought in an outside consultant, Dr. Warren Phillips, supposedly to review research methodologies and ensure best practices. In reality, Dr. Phillips had minimal experience in my specific field and spent most of his time requesting detailed documentation of my processes, techniques, and unpublished research. He is asking questions that go well beyond methodology review, Stephanie said, after Dr. Phillips had spent 3 hours interrogating her about our laboratory notebooks. He wanted to know specific formulation details that are not even finalized. I tried to address the situation professionally, scheduling a meeting with Jeffrey to discuss my concerns. His assistant rescheduled twice before finally fitting me in for a 15-minute slot between other meetings. Dr. Phillips is a respected industry consultant. Jeffrey dismissed when I raised the issue. His review is standard procedure during leadership transitions. But he is requesting proprietary information that goes beyond process review, I explained. Some of these details are covered by my patent protections and confidentiality agreements. Jeffrey's expression hardened slightly. All research conducted at Bradford facilities belongs to Bradford Pharmaceuticals. That is not entirely accurate according to my contract, I said carefully. Something flashed in Jeffrey's eyes. Contracts can be reviewed and renegotiated, Dr. Taylor. Times change. Companies evolve. That same afternoon, I discovered my access to the central research database had been restricted. When I called IT support, they informed me that authorization for such access now required executive approval. My request would be processed in due time. The next blow came during a lunch break. I was eating alone in the corner of the cafeteria, reviewing journal articles on my tablet, when I overheard a conversation from the next table. They are restructuring the entire research division, said a voice I recognized as belonging to Jeremy from marketing. Jeffrey thinks the current setup is too academic, not focused enough on commercial applications. What about Taylor's team? Asked another voice. Their patents are the backbone of our product line. Word is, they are moving her to client relations or something. Jeffrey thinks she would be more valuable as the face of scientific innovation rather than buried in a lab. Plus, she is presentable enough to put in front of clients. I sat frozen, appetite gone, as the conversation continued. My years of education, my scientific breakthroughs, my dedication to research all reduced to being presentable enough for client meetings. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. The investor meeting the following week confirmed my worst fears. I sat silently in the back of the conference room as Victor presented my research as if it were his own. Slides I had created but never been asked to share were displayed with subtle modifications. Projects my team had developed over years were presented as recent initiatives under the new leadership. Most disturbing was the announcement of a major new product line, BioAdvance, scheduled for launch in just 2 months. The presentation described it as the next generation of Bradford's patented drug delivery systems. But I had not been consulted about using my technologies in this new application. The specific combination of my patents they were planning to use required careful calibration and testing that typically took 6 to 8 months, not 2. After the meeting, I tried to speak with Victor about my concerns. "The timeline for BioAdvance seems extremely accelerated," I said, trying to keep my tone collaborative. "The integration of these specific technologies requires extensive validation." Victor smiled thinly. "We have streamlined the development process. Jeffrey has approved the timeline. But there are technical considerations that cannot simply be streamlined away," I insisted. "The interaction between the polymer matrix and the enzyme triggers needs specific conditions to maintain stability." "Perhaps that was true under the previous methodology," Victor replied dismissively. "Our new processes are more efficient." I returned to my lab deeply troubled. That night, I stayed late reviewing my contract once again and cataloging exactly which of my patents were being incorporated into the BioAdvance product line. The list was extensive. Nearly every key component relied on my innovations. The following day brought another disturbing development. My research team was informed that we would be relocating to a smaller laboratory space to accommodate a new commercial applications team being formed under Victor's direction. The timeline for this move, 2 weeks. "This makes no sense," Stephanie said as we surveyed our years of carefully organized research materials. "We cannot possibly transfer all this equipment and maintain our current projects." "I do not think maintaining our current projects is the priority," I replied quietly. I scheduled another meeting with Jeffrey, determined to understand what was happening. This time, his assistant did not even pretend he would make time for me. "Mr. Bradford's schedule is fully committed for the next 3 weeks," she informed me with practiced politeness. "Perhaps you could meet with human resources if you have concerns." Instead, I went to Lisa in HR, hoping our friendship might yield some honest answers. "I can only tell you what I know officially," Lisa said, closing her office door. "The research division is being restructured to align with the new corporate vision. Some roles are being redefined." "And unofficially," I pressed. Lisa hesitated. "Unofficially, I would suggest you prepare for significant changes. There have been discussions about your role that I cannot detail, but they do not align with your current position or focus." That evening, I received an email about a mandatory meeting with Jeffrey and Victor the following morning to discuss exciting new opportunities. The knot in my stomach tightened. I spent the night reviewing every detail of my contract and patent documentation. By morning, I had a clear understanding of my legal position, but no clarity on what awaited me. The Bradford Pharmaceuticals Annual Innovation Gala had been a highlight of the corporate calendar under Harold's leadership. It was a celebration of scientific achievement, with researchers receiving recognition for their contributions. This year, under Jeffrey's direction, it transformed into something entirely different. The hotel ballroom glittered with expensive decorations. Corporate sponsors and investors mingled with executives, while researchers and regular employees were seated at distant tables. The evening's program focused heavily on market projections, strategic partnerships, and revenue forecasts. The actual innovations were secondary, mentioned briefly between discussions of profit margins. I sat at a table far from the main stage, watching as Jeffrey presented his vision for the company's future. The centerpiece of his presentation was the upcoming BioAdvance product line, positioned as the cornerstone of Bradford's new market strategy. My name was not mentioned once, despite every slide featuring technologies I had developed. "This revolutionary approach represents the future of Bradford Pharmaceuticals," Jeffrey announced proudly. "And to lead this exciting new era, I am pleased to introduce our new head of innovation, who will be joining us from Mercer Biotech. Please welcome Maxwell Bradford." A young man in his late 20s strode confidently onto the stage. With his perfect hair-tailored suit and practiced smile, Maxwell Bradford looked more like a model than a scientist. Jeffrey beamed with paternal pride as he handed the microphone to his son. "Bradford Pharmaceuticals has always been at the forefront of innovation." Maxwell began, his voice carrying the same entitled confidence as his father's. "But the future demands new thinking, new approaches, and dynamic leadership. Under my direction, our innovation pipeline will accelerate to meet market demands while maximizing shareholder value." I listened in disbelief as Maxwell outlined his vision for technologies I had spent years developing. He used the right scientific terminology, clearly having been briefed, but there was a superficial quality to his understanding that would have been obvious to anyone with genuine expertise. After the presentation's dinner was served, I picked at my food trying to process what this new appointment meant for my team and our work. As coffee was being served, Maxwell Bradford appeared at my table. "Dr. Taylor," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "My father suggested I introduce myself. I understand you have been with the company for some time." 8 years, I replied evenly. "I lead the research division that developed the technologies featured in your presentation." "Ah, yes, the previous research approach," he nodded dismissively. "We will be taking things in a more commercially focused direction now. Less academic, more results-oriented." I felt a surge of indignation but kept my expression neutral. Those academic approaches have generated billions in revenue for Bradford. Maxwell's smile tightened. "And we appreciate that foundation. But moving forward, we need innovation that moves at market speed. My father and I have big plans for restructuring the research division." "I would be interested to hear those plans given my position," I said. "About that," Maxwell leaned closer, lowering his voice. "We are reimagining several key roles. Someone with your presentation skills might be better utilized in client relations or product education. The technical details can be handled by our new development team." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. My presentation skills— "Let us be direct," Maxwell said with false cordiality. "Bradford Pharmaceuticals is entering a new era. We do not need just a pretty face here, sweetheart. This is a real company, not your little hobby. The serious scientific work will be directed by people who understand the business realities." The condescension in his tone made my skin crawl, but decades of navigating male-dominated spaces had taught me to control my visible reactions. I simply nodded as if considering his words. "I see," I said finally. "Thank you for your candor." "Excellent," Maxwell replied, clearly mistaking my calm for acceptance. "My assistant will set up a meeting next week to discuss the transition. In the meantime, I will need comprehensive documentation on all current research projects." After he walked away, I remained seated processing what had just occurred. Around me, the gala continued, executives laughing and celebrating, while my professional identity was being systematically dismantled. 8 years of groundbreaking work reduced to being just a pretty face. I excused myself and found a quiet corridor outside the ballroom. Leaning against the wall, I took several deep breaths, trying to calm the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. This was not the first time I had been underestimated or dismissed because of my gender or appearance. Throughout my education and career, I had encountered similar attitudes. At MIT, a professor had suggested I might be more suited to science education than research. At conferences, male colleagues often assumed I was an assistant rather than the lead researcher. Even at Bradford, before Harold took notice of my work, I had been passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified male candidates. Each time I had proven my worth through results, letting my work speak for itself. I had believed that excellence would eventually overcome prejudice. But standing in that hotel corridor, I realized that some minds would never value women as equals, no matter how many patents we held or breakthroughs we achieved. I returned to my empty apartment that night with a clarity I had not felt in months. Opening my laptop, I began systematically reviewing every aspect of my situation: my contract, my patent ownership, my options. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The question was no longer whether to act, but how to execute my departure with maximum effect and absolute legal precision. Maxwell Bradford had made a catastrophic mistake. He had dismissed me as just a pretty face without bothering to learn who I truly was or what I was capable of. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson. The first call I made Monday morning was to Martin Goldstein, my attorney. "I need to confirm the exact procedure for patent reassignment and licensing revocation," I explained, keeping my tone professional despite my internal turmoil. Martin sounded concerned. "Has something happened at Bradford?" "Let us just say the new leadership does not value my contributions appropriately," I replied. "I need to understand my options." We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. In the meantime, I arrived at work as usual, nodding politely to colleagues while beginning the careful process of documentation. Every project, every research note, every patent application. I created a comprehensive inventory of what was legally mine versus company property. Martin's office was a calm oasis away from Bradford Pharmaceuticals. The veteran attorney listened intently as I detailed the events of recent weeks, taking occasional notes, but mostly absorbing the situation. Your contract is unusually favorable, he confirmed, after reviewing the documents. Harold Bradford gave you extraordinary protections. The patents remain your intellectual property, with Bradford having exclusive licensing rights only as long as certain conditions are met. And those conditions include, I prompted, appropriate attribution of your work, your continued role in research related to your innovations, and interestingly, a moral conduct clause requiring Bradford to maintain ethical business practices related to your technologies. I nodded. And if I determine these conditions have been violated, you can revoke the exclusive licensing with 30 days' notice. Bradford would retain non-exclusive rights only for existing products, not new applications or developments. The process requires formal notification and documentation of the specific violations. How quickly could we prepare such notification? Martin studied me carefully. We could have it ready by tomorrow. But Melanie, this is a significant step. Bradford will almost certainly challenge this legally. Let them, I said, with quiet determination. I have documented everything. Every meeting where I was excluded. Every presentation where my work was credited to others. Every restriction of access to my own research. And most importantly, every communication about the BioAdvance launch that reveals they are rushing to market without proper testing. Over the next 3 days, I executed my plan with methodical precision. Each evening after most employees had left, I backed up research data. I was legally entitled to careful to touch nothing that belonged solely to the company. I organized my personal belongings, gradually removing small items each day to avoid attention. Stephanie noticed my unusual behavior on the second day. I invited her to coffee at a cafe several blocks from the office. Something is happening, she said, once we were seated in a quiet corner. You are acting differently. I trusted Stephanie implicitly after 6 years of working together. I am leaving Bradford, I told her plainly. The new management has made it clear I have no future there. Her eyes widened. What? They cannot be that stupid. Your patents are the foundation of the company. Apparently, I am just a pretty face who should be in client relations, not serious research, I said, repeating Maxwell's words. Stephanie's expression darkened. That arrogant little. What are you going to do? I am taking my patents with me, I explained. Legally, I can revoke Bradford's exclusive licensing rights under certain conditions, which have definitely been met. What about the BioAdvance launch? Without my patents, there is no BioAdvance, I said simply. Stephanie was quiet for a moment. What about the rest of us? The research team. That is partly why I wanted to talk to you, I replied. I am planning to establish my own research company. I would value your expertise if you were interested. Her face broke into a smile. Are you kidding? Working for someone who actually understands the science. Just tell me when. By Thursday, everything was in place. Martin had prepared the formal patent reassignment notifications. I had secured all my personal research and documentation. Stephanie had quietly backed up her own work and prepared for her departure. I had even rented small office space in a business park 20 minutes from Bradford, the first step toward establishing my own company. The BioAdvance launch was scheduled for the following Tuesday. According to the company-wide email, it would be the most significant product release in Bradford Pharmaceuticals history. Jeffrey and Maxwell would be presenting to major clients, media, and investors. Millions had been spent on marketing materials, event planning, and production scaling, none of which would matter without the patents that made the product possible. Friday morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual, dressed in my most professional attire. I had scheduled a meeting with Lisa in HR for 9 o'clock, ostensibly to discuss career development opportunities. My letter of resignation was in my bag, along with the formal patent reassignment notifications prepared by Martin. As I organized the final items from my desk into a small box, my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie M. is asking for complete project files by end of day. Getting nervous. I smiled slightly. Maxwell was clearly preparing for the launch, unaware that the intellectual foundation of the entire product line was about to be pulled out from under him. I responded simply, everything proceeding as planned. At precisely 9 o'clock, I walked into Lisa's office, closing the door behind me. Melanie, she greeted me with a slightly sad smile. I have been expecting this conversation. You always were perceptive, I replied, taking a seat across from her desk. Before you say anything official, Lisa said carefully, are you certain there might be ways to navigate the new structure? I appreciated her concern but shook my head. My decision is final. I am submitting my resignation effective immediately. I handed her the envelope containing my formal letter. Lisa accepted it with a nod. I understand. For what it is worth, I think Bradford is making a terrible mistake. It is not your mistake to worry about, I assured her. But there is something else you should be aware of. I removed the patent reassignment notifications from my bag, explaining their significance as Lisa's expression shifted from resignation to shock. These patents, they are the core of bioadvance, she said, understanding, dawning in her eyes. Yes, and legally they are mine to control. Bradford has violated the terms of our licensing agreement repeatedly over the past months. Lisa looked genuinely distressed. This will devastate the company. The launch will not proceed as planned, I finished for her. Perhaps Jeffrey and Maxwell should have considered that before dismissing me as just a pretty face. Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock before the door swung open without waiting for a response. Jeffrey Bradford stood in the doorway, Maxwell slightly behind him. What is this meeting about, Jeffrey? Demanded, his gaze moving between Lisa and me. A private HR matter, Lisa began, but I raised a hand to stop her. I was just submitting my resignation, I said calmly, meeting Jeffrey's eyes. Effective immediately. Jeffrey's expression remained cold, but I caught the slight narrowing of his eyes. That is unfortunate timing with the BioAdvance launch approaching. We will need a complete transfer of all research materials before your departure. I have already provided Bradford Pharmaceuticals with everything the company is legally entitled to, I replied evenly. My personal research and patent documentation will be coming with me. Maxwell stepped forward, his face flushing slightly. All research conducted at Bradford belongs to the company. You cannot simply walk out with it. I smiled slightly. Actually, I can. Perhaps you should have reviewed my contract before dismissing me as nothing more than a pretty face. The patents that power BioAdvance are my intellectual property. Bradford's exclusive licensing rights have been revoked due to multiple violations of our agreement. Jeffrey's composed facade cracked. That is absurd. Our legal team will. Your legal team will confirm everything I am saying, I interrupted. The notifications have been properly filed. Your exclusive rights end in 30 days, but your rights to new applications such as BioAdvance require my ongoing involvement and consent, which I am not providing. The color drained from Jeffrey's face as the implications sank in. You cannot do this. The launch is Tuesday. Investors are flying in from around the world. Perhaps you should have considered that before sidelining the person whose innovations make your products possible, I replied, standing up and collecting my bag. Now, if you will excuse me, I have finished my responsibilities here. Security will escort you out. Jeffrey snapped, pulling out his phone. That will not be necessary, I replied. I am perfectly capable of finding the exit. I have already removed my personal belongings. Everything else in my office belongs to the company and remains untouched. As I walked past them toward the door, Maxwell grabbed my arm. You will regret this. My father will bury you in litigation. I calmly removed his hand. Touch me again, and I will add assault to the documentation of hostile workplace conditions. As for litigation, I look forward to explaining in court exactly how Bradford Pharmaceuticals attempted to misappropriate my intellectual property while violating multiple contractual obligations. I walked through the office with my head held high, aware of the curious glances from colleagues who had undoubtedly overheard portions of the confrontation. Stephanie gave me a subtle nod as I passed her desk. She would submit her own resignation later that afternoon. The security guard at the front desk, whom I had greeted every morning for 8 years, looked uncomfortable as I approached. I am sorry, Dr. Taylor, he said quietly. They called down. I need to collect your badge and escort you out. Of course, Paul, I replied, handing him my badge with a smile. This is not your fault. Take care of yourself. As I walked to my car, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, anxiety, relief, sadness for the company Harold had built. But mostly I felt a profound sense of reclaiming my power. For years I had allowed my work to speak for me, believing that excellence would be recognized and respected, regardless of gender or appearance. Jeffrey and Maxwell Bradford had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes you need to stand up and demand the respect you have earned. My phone began ringing before I had even pulled out of the parking lot. Bradford Pharmaceuticals. I silenced it and drove home, ready to begin the next chapter of my career on my own terms. Monday morning arrived with a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in 8 years, I did not drive to Bradford Pharmaceuticals. Instead, I met with Martin at his office to review the cascade of legal communications that had begun flowing over the weekend. Their legal team is in panic mode, Martin noted, scrolling through emails. They are offering significant financial incentives for you to return and reinstate the licensing agreements. Not interested, I replied simply. They are also threatening extensive litigation if you proceed with removing patent rights. I shrugged. Let them try. We have documented every violation of the agreement. Their own emails acknowledging they are rushing BioAdvance to market without proper testing would be particularly interesting to the FDA. Do you not think? Martin smiled slightly. You have thought of everything. Still, this will get ugly before it gets better. Bradford has resources. So do I reminded him. 8 years of very generous compensation, most of which I saved, and the truth, which is a powerful resource in itself. Throughout the day, my phone continued to ring with Bradford numbers. Executives I had barely spoken with during my tenure suddenly urgently needed to reach me. I let everything go to voicemail, focusing instead on setting up my new workspace and outlining plans for my own research company. By late afternoon, Stephanie texted me. Submitted resignation. Complete chaos here. J and M having meltdown in conference room. Security escorted me out immediately. I felt a twinge of regret that Stephanie had experienced such treatment, but was not surprised. Welcome to the free world, I texted back. Office space ready when you are. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at my door. Lisa Franklin stood on my porch looking both professional and slightly uncomfortable. I am not here officially, she said, when I invited her in. I just thought you should know what is happening. Over tea in my kitchen, Lisa painted a picture of corporate chaos. The legal team had confirmed my rights to the patents, sending the executive floor into panic mode. Emergency meetings had continued throughout the weekend. Technical teams were scrambling to determine if BioAdvance could be reconfigured without my patented technologies. The answer apparently was a resounding no. Jeffrey is trying to delay the launch, but too many arrangements are locked in, Lisa explained. Major clients and investors have already arrived in town. The media is primed for the announcement. Not my problem, I replied, though I did feel sorry for the rank-and-file employees caught in the middle. Lisa nodded. I know. And for what it is worth, many people are quietly cheering you on, especially the women in the company. Maxwell's comment about you being just a pretty face has made the rounds. Interesting how quickly news travels, I observed. The research division has basically ground to a halt, Lisa continued. No one knows who is in charge or what projects are continuing. Several other researchers are updating their resumes. By Tuesday morning, the scheduled day of the BioAdvance launch, my phone had finally stopped ringing with Bradford numbers. Instead, I received a text from Daniel. In regulatory affairs, launch proceeding, despite everything. Complete disaster happening in real time. I had no desire to witness the calamity firsthand, but I did monitor industry news throughout the day. The first hint of trouble came mid-morning when Bradford's stock price began dropping without any clear news catalyst. By noon, rumors were circulating on financial websites about unexpected complications with the BioAdvance launch. At 2 o'clock, the time scheduled for the grand product announcement, Bradford Pharmaceuticals issued a terse statement about technical delays requiring additional product refinement. The stock immediately dropped 12%. By 4 o'clock, industry blogs were reporting that the much-hyped launch had been cancelled entirely, with confused clients and investors leaving the event without explanations. Bradford's stock ended the day down 27%, triggering circuit breakers twice during trading hours. Stephanie arrived at my house that evening with a bottle of champagne and first-hand accounts from former colleagues still inside the company. Jeffrey completely lost it, she reported, as we sat in my living room. When they had to cancel the launch, he started screaming in front of everyone. Who sabotaged this? This is corporate espionage. Someone will pay for this. Did anyone mention that perhaps dismissing the patent holder as just a pretty face might have been the actual problem? I asked dryly. Stephanie laughed. Maxwell has apparently been banished from the executive floor. The board of directors called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. The corporate fallout continued for days. Industry publications began reporting on the bio-advanced disaster, with some journalists digging deep enough to uncover the patent reassignment filings. My phone started ringing again, but now with calls from reporters seeking comments. I declined them all, focusing instead on establishing my new company, Taylor Biomedical Innovations. By Friday, Bradford Pharmaceuticals announced that Jeffrey Bradford was taking a leave of absence while the company reorganized its product development strategy. The stock had stabilized, but at 64% of its pre-disaster value, billions in market capitalization had evaporated in a week. I felt no joy in the company's struggles. Many good people worked there, people who had nothing to do with Jeffrey and Maxwell's arrogance. But I did feel vindicated. For the first time in my career, I had refused to be sidelined or diminished. I had stood up for my value, not just my valuables. As Stephanie and I worked to set up our new laboratory space, I reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Just 2 weeks earlier, I had been contemplating how to navigate an increasingly hostile work environment. Now I was founding my own company with complete control over my research and innovations. "Do you regret it?" Stephanie asked one evening as we unpacked equipment in our new lab. Bradford was established. "This is a risk." I considered the question seriously. I regret that it came to this. I regret that Jeffrey and Maxwell could not see past their own biases. But I do not regret standing up for myself. Some risks are worth taking. The following week brought another surprise visitor. Harold Bradford himself, looking tanned from retirement, but troubled, requested a meeting. We met at a quiet cafe, away from both Bradford Pharmaceuticals and my new office. "I owe you an apology," Harold said, after we had exchanged pleasantries. "I knew Jeffrey could be difficult, but I never imagined he would dismantle everything I built so quickly." "You are not responsible for your son's actions," I replied, "or your grandson's." Harold sighed heavily. "Perhaps not directly, but I raised Jeffrey. I saw his flaws, and still hoped he would rise to the responsibility. As for Maxwell," he shook his head, "that young man has never faced consequences for his actions until now." "Are you back involved with the company?" I asked. "Temporarily," Harold confirmed. "The board asked me to step in as interim CEO while they search for a replacement. The damage is substantial, Melanie. Not just financially, but to the company culture, to our research pipeline." I felt a pang of sympathy for the man who had been my mentor and champion for so many years. "I am sorry it came to this, Harold. I truly am." "I do not blame you," he said firmly. "You protected what was rightfully yours. I designed your contract that way intentionally, though I never imagined it would be needed so dramatically." He paused. "Would you consider returning? On your own terms, of course." The offer was unexpected. "I appreciate that, Harold, but no. I have started building something new, something where I will never again be dismissed as just a pretty face." Harold nodded slowly. "I understand. For what it is worth, Jeffrey and Maxwell are both out permanently." The board was unanimous. As we parted, Harold embraced me warmly. "Whatever you build next will be extraordinary, Melanie. I have always believed in you, not just your innovations." Walking away from that meeting, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter with Bradford Pharmaceuticals was ending, but my story was continuing on my own terms. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Taylor Biomedical Innovations grew from a 2-person operation in a small rented lab to a team of 15 researchers and support staff. Stephanie proved invaluable as Chief Research Officer, helping to build our team and establish rigorous but humane protocols. Our first headquarters was modest, but functional, a converted warehouse space with state-of-the-art laboratory equipment and comfortable offices. Unlike the sterile corporate environment of Bradford, I encouraged personalization of workspaces and regular team lunches where we discussed everything from research challenges to favorite books. 5 former Bradford researchers eventually joined us, drawn by our growing reputation and the opportunity to work in an environment that valued scientific integrity over corporate politics. Daniel from Regulatory Affairs came aboard as our compliance director, bringing valuable expertise in navigating FDA approvals. The transition was not without challenges. Starting a biomedical research company requires significant capital, and while I had savings, establishing proper laboratory facilities demanded more. Initially, several investors were skeptical, having heard Bradford's version of events through industry channels. They are calling you difficult to work with. My first potential investor said bluntly during our meeting, a flight risk. I stayed at Bradford for 8 years. I replied calmly. I left only when the new management made it clear they valued my appearance over my intellect. Would you consider that being difficult or having self-respect? Eventually, we secured funding from 3 forward-thinking investment groups, including one that specifically supported women-led businesses in STEM fields. Their due diligence had included conversations with Harold Bradford, who apparently gave me a glowing recommendation. Harold said you were the most brilliant mind he had ever encountered in the industry. Elaine Winters, the lead investor, told me during our signing meeting. He also said Bradford's loss was entirely self-inflicted, and our gain. With stable funding secured, we focused on building our first research initiatives. I was determined that Taylor Biomedical would prioritize patient outcomes alongside profitability, an approach I had valued under Harold's leadership at Bradford. Our first major project expanded on my previous work in drug delivery systems, but with applications for treatments that were typically considered unprofitable, despite significant medical need. By the 6-month mark, we had 2 promising technologies in development and were preparing initial patent filings. Bradford Pharmaceuticals, meanwhile, continued its recovery under new leadership. Harold had remained as interim CEO for 3 months before the board-appointed Dr. Lydia Chen, a respected pharmaceutical executive with a strong research background. The stock had partially rebounded, though not to its previous heights. Industry publications eventually moved on from the bioadvanced disaster to new scandals and successes. My decision to leave with my patents became a case study in several business school ethics courses, with opinions divided on whether I had been justified or overly harsh in my response to Maxwell's comment. I maintained a low public profile, declining speaking engagements and interview requests to focus on building my company. The work itself brought the greatest satisfaction, returning to the pure joy of scientific discovery that had drawn me to research initially. One Tuesday afternoon, as I was reviewing preliminary test results with Stephanie, our receptionist announced an unexpected visitor, Harold Bradford. He looked more relaxed than during our last meeting, the burden of saving his family's company no longer weighing on him. "Just thought I would see how you are doing," he said, taking in our laboratory with appreciative eyes. "Impressive for just 6 months." "We are small but focused," I replied, giving him a tour of our facilities. "No bureaucracy to navigate means faster implementation of good ideas." Harold nodded approvingly. "You always did prefer results to process. How is the funding situation?" "Stable," I assured him. "Our investors understand the timeline for biomedical development. They are not expecting overnight miracles." After the tour, we sat in my modest office, catching up on industry developments and personal news. Harold had fully returned to retirement, spending time with his grandchildren, and serving on several nonprofit boards. "Lydia is doing well at Bradford," he mentioned. "Different style than mine, but effective. Very research-focused, which the company needed after Jeffrey's disastrous tenure." "I am glad," I said sincerely. "Many good people work there. They deserve competent leadership." Harold hesitated before continuing. "Jeffrey and Maxwell are no longer in pharmaceuticals. Jeffrey has retreated to consulting and Maxwell." He sighed. "My grandson is learning some hard lessons about reputation in this industry. No company wants to hire him after the bioadvanced debacle." I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only a distant sadness that talent and opportunity had been wasted through arrogance and prejudice. "Your departure created ripples beyond Bradford," Harold continued. "Several major pharmaceutical companies have instituted reviews of how they handle intellectual property and treat their research staff. A few have discovered their female scientists were significantly undercompensated and underpromoted compared to male counterparts with similar qualifications." "That is progress," I suppose I acknowledged. "It is a start," Harold agreed, "though I wish it had not required such a dramatic catalyst." After Harold left, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The pain of being dismissed as just a pretty face had transformed into the empowerment of building something new on my own terms. The fear of leaving established security had given way to the excitement of charting my own course. The following week brought another visitor from my Bradford past. Daniel had mentioned that Lisa Franklin was considering a career change, and I had extended an invitation to discuss possibilities at Taylor Biomedical. She arrived for our lunch meeting looking both professional and notably more relaxed than during her Bradford days. "The company has stabilized," she reported, as we ate at a small cafe near our office. Dr. Chen has restructured the executive team completely. Most of Jeffrey's appointees are gone. And the atmosphere, I asked, genuinely curious. Better, Lisa acknowledged. More focus on the actual work, less politics, but also more caution. Your departure scared them. They are terrified of losing other key researchers and their intellectual property. I smiled slightly. Fear can be a powerful motivator for change. That is why I wanted to talk with you, Lisa continued. Your actions inspired me, Melanie. After watching you stand up for your value, I began questioning my own tolerance for an environment that had become toxic. Life is too short to spend it enabling bad leadership. By the end of our lunch, Lisa had accepted a position as Human Resources Director at Taylor Biomedical. Her experience and ethical approach would be invaluable as we continued to grow. That evening, I received an email that brought my journey full circle. A young female biomedical researcher named Ava had written to me after hearing about my story through industry channels. She described facing similar dismissive treatment at her current company and was considering leaving science entirely. I am tired of being the only woman in the room, always having to prove myself twice over, she wrote. Does it ever get better? Is it worth continuing to fight? I sat with her email for a long time, carefully considering my response. Finally, I wrote back with an invitation to visit our laboratories and meet our team. The fight is exhausting, I acknowledged, but creating spaces where science is valued over gender makes it worthwhile. Sometimes you have to build what you cannot find. 2 days later, Ava toured our facilities, her eyes widening at the collaborative atmosphere and the equal representation of women in leadership roles. By the end of her visit, she had submitted her resume for our upcoming research position. I never knew a lab could feel like this, she told me before leaving. Like science is what matters, not politics or appearance. That is exactly what we are building here, I replied. A place where brilliance is recognized regardless of its packaging. 1 year, after leaving Bradford Pharmaceuticals, Taylor Biomedical Innovations celebrated its first patent approval. The team gathered in our main conference room, champagne glasses raised in toast. To proving that success does not require sacrificing integrity, Stephanie announced. And to recognizing that a pretty face and a brilliant mind are not mutually exclusive, I added with a smile. As I looked around at the diverse, talented team we had assembled, I felt profound gratitude for the journey, even its painful parts. Maxwell's dismissive comment had been the catalyst for building something far better than the position I had lost. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest gift your opponents can give you. It provides the space to surprise them, to exceed expectations, to rebuild on your own terms. I had learned that respect cannot always be earned through work alone, sometimes it must be demanded. Most importantly, I had discovered that walking away from toxicity is not failure but the first step toward authentic success. If you have ever been underestimated or dismissed based on your appearance rather than your abilities, I hope my story reminds you of your power to redefine the narrative. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction but creation, building something so undeniably excellent that those who undervalued you must confront their mistake daily. Have you ever had to walk away from a situation where you were not respected? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Thank you for listening, and remember, your value is never determined by someone else's limited perception.